Good morning, children. Today in Social Science and History, Class 9, the chapter Socialism in Europe and the Russian Revolution, we'll see how a socialist society came to be established in Russia. Now, during the Civil War, industries and banks continued to be nationalized. Then peasants were permitted to cultivate the land that had been seized by them. All this was done to show that there was collective work going on in the country. Now, what is the process of centralized planning? How did they take it up? Now, naturally, they wanted the industrial growth to take place. They wanted agriculture also to increase, the agricultural production to be increased. So, for all this, the officials made 5-year plans for improvement of the economy. And the government fixed prices so that the industrial growth could be promoted during the first two plans. The first that was from 27 to 1932, and the second one was from 1933 to 1938. And it actually brought about economic growth in the country. Industrial production also increased by 100% between 1929 and 32. And particularly in commodities like oil, coal and steel, there was certainly 100% increase in the production. Now, the condition of the workers who worked, there was rapid construction took place, and this resulted in poor working conditions for workers. Poor working conditions were there, and their living conditions also were very poor. Even the basic facilities were not provided to them. So they demanded rather that there should be improvement in the facilities. Then only their capacity and ability to work would increase. So the measures that were adopted in order to improve condition of the workers was that a schooling system was developed, so that people who worked at factories and peasants also, so the factory workers and the peasants, they could enter universities. So that was one change that was brought about for them. Then secondly, creches were established in factories for working women who had small children and they could not leave them unattended. So there were these creches in the factories so that the children could be looked after while the women were engaged in work. Then they also introduced cheap public health care facilities to provide better health care facilities to the workers, and quarters and houses were made for the workers also. But at this time, the resources of the government were limited, so the effect was uneven. That means it was not equal everywhere. So there were improvements, but still it was not as much as was required at that time. Now we come to see this, how Stalinism and collectivization was introduced. Collectivization was actually a policy of forced consolidation of individual peasants into kolkhoz, that is collective farms, by the Soviet government, because small farms could not be modernized. So they brought about these changes. Now the early planned period, it resulted in disasters. It was something new that they had introduced, but at the same time, it was not as they had expected it to be. So there was disaster in agriculture. After Lenin's death in 1924, who was the leader of the Bolshevik Party, Stalin became the leader of the Soviet Communist Party. The Bolshevik Party had been renamed as the Soviet Communist Party. Now, at this time, there was acute shortage of food grains. Food grains were not enough, and peasants, the government had fixed prices that they will purchase at a certain price from these peasants also. But the peasants refused to sell these grains to the government because they felt that this was not right price for them. And at this time, now why there was a shortage also, it was believed by Stalin that the rich peasants were holding stocks. Why were they holding on to the stocks? Hoping that there would be a rise in the price, and that is the time when they would sell. So they kept on waiting, and so Stalin felt that this was being done. So we see that how the changes took place, of course, And the two 5-year plans also were introduced in the hope of bringing about improvement in the economy, both in the industrial growth and agricultural as well. Now, what is the collectivization and why it was done? Small farms could not be modernized because their land holdings were now they were very small, so they could not bring about modern methods to cultivate. So they had to eliminate these kulaks, that is the well-to-do peasants. Although some still continue to work, but they were not treated very well by Stalin. Then those of the people who were opposing or who were criticizing Stalin and the policies, they were deported, or you can say that they were forcibly removed. They were removed from the country, or they were exiled. That was a punishment given to them if anybody criticized the policies of Stalin. Then another impact that was felt was that there were bad harvests. Poor harvests were there between 1930 and 1933. Now this resulted in famines, that is acute shortage of food for the people in Soviet history. And in these famines, over 4 million people lost their lives. You can say that more than 4 million people died due to these famines or this acute shortage of food that took place because of the bad harvests. Now, Stalin did not want any kind of opposition, or he did not want any form of criticism to the policy that had been framed by them. And to curtail all this, whoever opposed them or whoever criticized the policies of Stalin, they were charged with conspiracy. That means that they were planning against Stalin and the government, and that they were against socialism. So these accusations were made against those people whoever tried to oppose his policies and his instructions. By 1939, one could see that over 2 million people were in prisons or labor camps. Why? Because they had criticized the policies of Stalin, or they had opposed it. So that was the punishment that was given to them, was that they were tortured and they were executed. So over 2 million people found themselves in prisons, or they were put in prisons because of their criticism and the opposition, or they found themselves in the labor camps, where there were professionals also, and these professionals were tortured over there. They were forcibly made to confess what they had not done, that they had not done anything wrong, but they were made to confess and they were executed. So this is the effect that it had on. So we also see, and among his own people, many supporters who earlier were supporting him, they felt that they began to criticize that there was confusion in industrial production, and it was all due to the planned economy and its consequences. So they also, some people within the party also, within the Soviet Communist Party also criticized his policies, that all this confusion that took place in the industrial growth and development and production was all due to the policies that had been implemented in the country. So we see that how gradually they came to be a socialist society formed over there, how they wanted all this collective farming to be done so that the government could purchase these grains and all from the peasants at a certain fixed prices which are fixed by the government. But there was certainly no scope for, or no chance given to the people to criticize or oppose. They had to follow the policies, and there was no way that they could disagree with the government and policies of Stalin or not do what they were told. Thank you.